I should start by saying this. I wasn't supposed to be in that house alone. The showing had been canceled that morning, but something in me insisted on stopping by anyway. It was a cold afternoon in upstate New York, the kind that makes old wooden floors creak louder than they should. I unlocked the door, stepped into the quiet hallway, and immediately felt as if I'd walked into a room that didn't entirely agree with the present year. The house wasn't abandoned, but it felt untouched, as if it had slowed down sometime around 1910 and never fully caught up. The air smelled faintly of iron and old paper, and the floor plan didn't match the blueprint in my folder. A wall seemed too close. A doorway seemed misplaced. I thought it was just the renovation work the owner mentioned on the phone, until I heard footsteps moving calmly in the parlor, like someone crossing a room they knew by heart. When I turned the corner, a woman stood there, not startled, not lost, not confused. She looked at me as si alguém fosse intruso. Her coat was outdated but clean, her hair pinned tightly as if she had just stepped out for a moment from another decade. She didn't ask who I was. She asked what I had done to her home. Swiftly, with an almost practiced certainty, she began describing details of the house's original layout: the narrow staircase that once stood behind the pantry, the servant's door that should be beside the window, the small bedroom that used to sit where my folder showed a modern dining area. And then she told me something I couldn't process right away. She said the house still obeyed the old rules, the ones written long before my clients were even born. Rules she claimed the house followed the same way a clock follows its gears. She said them softly, as if repeating instructions she had carried for a lifetime. Don't cross certain thresholds after dusk. Don't stand where the morning light falls on the floorboards. Don't speak near the western wall. Before I could ask her what any of that meant, she pressed a folded sheet of yellowed paper into my hand. Her voice trembled for the first time. "You'll understand soon," she whispered. "The house hasn't changed. Only the year did." I didn't open the paper right away. Something about the woman's voice, the steady certainty, the quiet urgency, made me hesitate. As a real estate agent in upstate New York, I've seen plenty of strange renovations, curious old layouts, and houses that carry more history than their owners realize. But nothing prepares you for someone who speaks about a home as if time itself were still negotiating with its walls. When she stepped back toward the parlor, I followed, not out of fear, but out of a feeling I can only describe as unfamiliar recognition, like remembering a place you've never visited. The house seemed to respond to her presence. Floorboards that had been silent suddenly echoed faintly under her steps. The draft in the hallway shifted, directing itself toward the closed dining room doors. She moved with the precision de quem sabia onde tudo deveria estar, mesmo quando o mundo à sua volta insistia em contradizê-la. She touched the frame of a wall that no longer existed, tracing a line in the air where the original border once stood. It felt as though I was watching someone navigate a map no one else could see. She told me her name only once, softly, as if it belonged to another life. Then she asked a question I still don't know how to answer. "How long have you lived here?" she said, but it wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion. To her, I wasn't a visitor or an intruder. I was someone occupying the wrong year. Before I could explain my job or the purpose of the showing, she glanced at my folder, frowned, and whispered, "That layout, it isn't the real one." I tried to tell her the house had been renovated. Kitchens moved, walls removed, hallways widened, all common changes for homes built over a century ago. But she only shook her head almost gently, as if I were the one confused. "Houses change," she said, "but their rules don't." Then she pointed to the folded sheet in my hand. "Those aren't guidelines. They're warnings." When I finally opened the paper, the handwriting was from another era. Thin, deliberate strokes, the ink faded with age. At the top, a single sentence stood alone, underlined twice. "If you find this in a year that isn't mine, follow every instruction. Hi, my name is Daniel. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep bringing more tales like this. Have you ever stepped into an old house and felt as if part of its past was still living there? Thank you to everyone who follows the channel and supports these stories. Now let's get back to the story. I stood in the center of the parlor holding the paper as if it were a relic I wasn't supposed to touch. The woman had stepped away from me, though stepped didn't feel like the right word. It was as if she drifted toward the back of the house, following paths no longer carved in wood. I could hear her footsteps, but they didn't align with any visible surface. Sometimes they sounded too close, sometimes strangely deep, as if coming from a different layer of the floor. The house settled with a long breath, one of those old timber groans that didn't quite match the air around it. I looked down at the paper again, but reading the rules felt like something I shouldn't do alone, or maybe something I wasn't ready for. Instead, I walked slowly back into the hallway, letting my eyes adjust to the muted daylight that seeped through the frosted windows. The wallpaper was a pale green, peeling slightly near the corners, but underneath it I noticed an older pattern, thin gold lines in a style they hadn't used since the early 1900s. Renovations often reveal hidden layers, but this felt different. This looked recently disturbed, as if brought to the surface again. I called out to the woman, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ma'am, I just want to talk. I'm not here to change anything." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting. Houses have a way of listening when they're old enough. This one listened too closely. I took a few steps toward the dining room, and that's when I noticed the draft again. But now it felt deliberate, almost guiding. It pushed lightly against my shoulder, urging me toward the narrow corridor near the staircase. I hesitated. That part of the house wasn't on the blueprint. According to the folder in my hand, the area beyond should have been sealed off decades ago. But the corridor was unmistakably there, dim, narrow, and carrying the smell of warm dust, as if someone had just passed through moments earlier. The woman's voice came faintly from somewhere ahead. "You're walking the wrong year," she said. Her tone calm but weighted with something I couldn't decipher. "This house isn't meant to open itself all at once. It shows you what you're ready for." I felt the air shift again, a subtle change of temperature, like stepping between two seasons in a single breath. The hallway ahead flickered, not visibly, but in feeling, like the space was tensing. I gripped the edge of the rule sheet without even realizing it. Something told me I needed to read it before taking another step. But before I unfolded the page, the woman spoke again, closer this time. "Be careful where you stand," she warned. "Some parts of this house still remember 1910 better than they remember you." Her footsteps moved deeper into the unseen corridor, and despite everything in me urging caution, I followed. The corridor narrowed as I walked deeper, though the shrinking wasn't visible at first glance. It was something I sensed in the way my shoulders tightened, in how the air pressed closer against my arms. The floorboards beneath my feet felt older here, softer, almost fragile, as if I were stepping onto a memory rather than a structure. Ahead of me, the woman's pace didn't change. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone returning to a room she'd left only moments ago, not a century. I passed a patch of wallpaper where the green layer had curled away entirely, revealing the older gold pattern underneath. This time, the lines weren't just decorative. They formed the faint outline of a doorway, one that didn't exist anymore. When I blinked, the image didn't disappear. If anything, it sharpened, as though the house were reminding me of something it once held. "Don't step through that," the woman said without turning around. "Not yet." Her voice wasn't harsh, but it left no room for argument. I stayed still until she continued walking, and only then moved after her. A strange hum threaded through the air, almost mechanical, like the ticking of a clock muffled by layers of cloth. It seemed to come from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. Not loud, but persistent. I couldn't decide if the sound was new or if the house had been making it the entire time and I was only now tuning into it. We reached a small landing where the corridor opened slightly. Dust hung in the air in drifting trails, but the pattern of their movement was wrong. They didn't float according to the breeze. They drifted in subtle spirals, forming shapes that dissolved as soon as I tried to focus on them. The woman looked at them with familiarity, not concern. "Time settles strangely here," she said. "Some moments fall slower than others." I tried to speak, but the dryness in my throat made the words catch. "How long have you been seeing the house like this?" She turned to me for the first time since entering the corridor. In her expression there was no fear, only a tired acceptance. "My entire life," she replied. "But the house changes its face depending on who's inside. You're new to it. It's still deciding what to show you." Before I could respond, she pointed toward a shadowed corner near the base of the stairs. Something was there, a faint outline, like the suggestion of a person standing still. Not in a threatening way, but as if they were frozen in place. caught between one breath and the next. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, didn't fade. I felt the rule sheet crinkle in my hand again. Maybe this was the moment to read it. Maybe the instructions weren't warnings for later. They were for now. The woman's gaze followed my hesitation. "That corner," she said softly, "belongs to a time you're not supposed to touch." And then, almost in a whisper, "Please don't step any closer." I froze at the edge of the landing, my eyes fixed on the unmoving outline in the corner. The figure wasn't solid, but it wasn't transparent either. It felt like looking at someone through warped glass. There, but not aligned with the moment I was standing in. Its presence pressed against the air, bending it slightly, the way heat distorts the space above a stove. I couldn't make out a face, but the posture was unmistakably human. Waiting, listening. The woman stepped between me and the corner, not protectively, but knowingly, like someone familiar with the behavior of a wild animal. "Don't worry," she said, her voice gentler than before. "It won't move toward you. It can't. It's caught in a year that still hasn't reached you." I swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means," she answered carefully, "that this house keeps moments the way other places keep dust." She approached the stair rail and rested her gloved hand on it. "Everything that's ever happened here lingers. Some years overlap, some years sleep, and some years wake up when they shouldn't." The figure's edges flickered, like it was shifting through frames of time instead of breaths. My skin prickled with a subtle cold, not from fear but from recognition. The irrational kind, the one that tells you that even impossible things can feel familiar when you're standing close enough. I finally unfolded the paper in my hand, unable to wait any longer. The ink was faded, almost dried into the fibers of the page, but the words were clear. Rule 1. Never stand where the house remembers someone else. A quiet shiver ran down my spine. I glanced toward the corner again. The figure hadn't changed position, but now I understood why. I was standing dangerously close to a place that wasn't meant for me, a moment preserved like a trapped echo. The woman watched me read, her expression unreadable. "The rules aren't meant to frighten you," she said. "They're meant to keep the years from touching one another." "Is that what's happening now?" I asked. "The years overlapping?" She nodded once. "For you, this is the first time. For the house, it's just another shift." A sudden creak echoed behind us, sharp like a step taken by someone heavy, though neither of us had moved. The sound came from deeper in the house, from a room that shouldn't have existed anymore. The woman didn't turn toward it. She only exhaled slowly, as if bracing for a familiar trouble. "That's another part waking up," she said quietly, "one that doesn't belong to either of us." The cold air around us tightened. The figure in the corner flickered again, and somewhere down the hall, a door that no longer existed, gently closed. I didn't realize how tightly I was gripping the paper until my fingers began to ache. The woman had already stepped away from the corner, her attention fixed on the hallway where the impossible door had just closed. I heard nothing else. No footsteps, no voices, no shifting of weight. Only the fading echo of that single sound that shouldn't have existed. The house felt heavier now, as if aware of my presence in a way it hadn't been moments before. "Don't follow that sound," the woman said quietly. "It belongs to a part of the house that stopped existing in your year." Her tone had changed, not warning, not fear, but something that felt like caution worn thin over many years. A kind of exhaustion that came from repeating instructions no one ever believed. I took a slow breath. Why would something from another year open on its own? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked along the narrow corridor, her fingers brushing lightly against the wallpaper, not touching it, tracing it, like she was reading Braille hidden beneath paint and age. "Because the house doesn't forget," she finally said. "Most places let time settle. This one keeps every year awake." She stopped beside a section of wall where the wallpaper had bubbled outward. With a gentle push, she flattened it, revealing faint pencil marks beneath. Measurements, dates, initials, renovation notes. But the handwriting was too old, the strokes too deliberate. They weren't made by a modern contractor. They looked like a record left by someone who couldn't imagine a world beyond gas lamps and horse carriages. I leaned closer. The top of the writing was partially obscured by the faded wallpaper, but one line stood out clearly. 1910. "Do not remove this wall." A chill slid down my spine. Was this your handwriting? She shook her head softly. No, that was written by the first owner. He understood the rules better than anyone. I opened my mouth to ask more, but she raised a hand, stopping me. Listen carefully, she said. If you're going to keep walking through this house, you need to understand something important. She stepped back, giving me space as if preparing me for something I wouldn't want to hear. The house doesn't show the same year twice, not in the same place. What you saw in the corner was 1 year. The sound you heard was another. And the corridor you're standing in. She looked down the narrow passage, eyes distant, almost sorrowful. It's not from 1910. It's from the year when the rules were broken. My heart thudded once, heavy, out of rhythm. What year is that? I asked. She lowered her gaze. I don't know, she whispered. But it's not mine, and it's not yours. The corridor lights dimmed slightly, not flickering, just breathing, as if the house exhaled around us. Whatever opened that door, she added, is trying to find the moment it came from. Then she looked directly at me, and it felt you walking into its year. I didn't move at first. Her words hung between us, heavy and cold, settling into the air like dust that refused to fall. The idea that I had stepped into another year wasn't something my mind knew how to accept, but the house wasn't giving me room to deny it either. The corridor ahead stretched into a muted gray, its edges dimming as if the light couldn't decide which decade it belonged to. The boards beneath my feet groaned softly, not under pressure but under memory. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. Every house has memories, she said, but this one doesn't just remember, it repeats. She looked down the hall again, not at the same time, not in order, and not always safely. I finally glanced at the rule sheet again, though I still hadn't read past the first line. My thumb rubbed over a corner of the faded paper, feeling the slight texture of the old ink. Something in me resisted unfolding it fully, as if reading the rules would cross a threshold I couldn't return from. What happens if I walk into a year that isn't meant for me? I asked. She didn't hesitate. You'll feel it before you see it. The air will change. The walls will shift. Sometimes only a little. A door that shouldn't be there. A window that opens to a room that vanished long ago. Her eyes softened, almost in pity. And sometimes a year can pull you deeper than the others. A floorboard creaked behind us, sharp, decisive, not the gentle settling from earlier. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone standing there, but the hall behind us was empty. The woman remained calm, but her attention flicked briefly to my left, to a stretch of wall that had remained unchanged since I arrived. Except now, it wasn't unchanged. A faint outline had appeared, a rectangular shape, too precise to be a shadow, a door frame, emerging like a photograph developing in slow motion. I took a step back without thinking. That wasn't there before, I said. It wasn't here in your year, she corrected softly, but it was in mine. Before I could respond, a faint sound drifted from behind the forming door frame, a slow, hollow tapping like someone lightly knocking from the other side. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient. The woman's expression tightened. Don't answer that, she whispered. No matter how many times it happens. My heart pounded. Why not? She exhaled, eyes fixed on the door that wasn't fully real yet. Because nothing that knocks from another year is looking for you. It's looking for itself. The tapping continued, a steady rhythm against wood that didn't exist anymore. I felt the cold rise along my arms, as if the air itself was bracing for what came next. And then the handle, a handle that hadn't been there seconds ago, began to turn. The handle turned slowly, almost politely, as if whoever, or whatever, stood on the other side knew the rhythm of this house better than I did. The metal creaked with a softness that didn't belong to new construction. It sounded old, worn, used many times before, just not in this century. I felt my breath shorten. The woman stepped closer to me, but not out of fear. Her expression was one of recognition, as though she'd been expecting this moment to resurface eventually. Stay still, she murmured, and don't speak. The handle reached its full turn but didn't open the door. Not fully. The frame pulsed, its edges flickering between faint visibility and dissolving mist. Whatever was turning the handle wasn't strong enough, or allowed, to push the door into this year. But it kept trying. A soft whisper leaked through the wood, just barely audible. Not words, but movement. Cloth, maybe. A slow inhale, something shifting its weight. The woman raised her hand, stopping me from stepping back. "If you move now, it might follow the motion," she whispered. "Years can chase what they recognize." Her words didn't reassure me, but I did as she said, staying frozen in place, my hands trembling around the rule sheet. I couldn't see through the door, but a shape formed on the other side. Not a clear silhouette, just a darker patch in the fog of its decade. It leaned forward, close enough that I could sense its attention even if I couldn't define its form. The whispers grew louder, still unintelligible, but purposeful, like someone searching in the dark for an object they once misplaced. The woman straightened, her voice low and firm. "It's not trying to open the door to enter," she said. "It's trying to see which year it landed in." I swallowed. "Can it see us?" She shook her head. "Not clearly, but it can feel you. That's why you must not move." A faint tapping resumed, 3 knocks again, softer this time, resigned, as if it had reached the wrong moment and realized it. The handle slowly released itself, turning back to its original position. The shape behind the door withdrew, melting back into its unseen room. And then, just as quietly as it had appeared, the entire frame faded. The outline softened into the wallpaper, until nothing remained but the pale green surface and the faint scent of old timber. The woman exhaled, relieved but not relaxed. "That was a year that's been wandering for a long time," she said. "It always comes back to places where the rules were first broken." I finally unfolded more of the paper, my pulse still pounding. Rule 2. Do not answer what belongs to another year. It may follow your voice. The ink trembled slightly in my hand, as though the house itself recognized the words. The woman glanced at the rule sheet, then at me. "You're starting to see," she said softly. "Now the house will show you more." The house didn't return to silence after the door vanished. It settled into something else, a kind of listening stillness, as if it were waiting to see what I would do next. The woman stepped out of the narrow corridor and into a wider stretch of hallway, where the wallpaper shifted subtly between green and a faint sepia tone, like an old photograph trying to restore its original colors. I followed her carefully, feeling the floorboards adjust beneath my weight, not creaking but shifting almost imperceptibly, as though aligning themselves to the correct year. "Now that the door has passed," she said quietly, "the house will try something gentler." She glanced over her shoulder. "It wants you to learn the rules." I unfolded more of the sheet, but she raised a hand, stopping me. "Not yet. It will make sense when you reach the right place." We entered what should have been the dining room. According to the blueprint in my folder, the space had been remodeled 30 years earlier. Walls removed, an open arch added, windows widened to let in more light. But standing inside it, I saw none of that. The room had reconstructed itself into something older, narrower, warmer. A single window framed the far wall, its glass wavy and uneven, holding sunlight that looked more like dusk from another century. And at the center of the room stood a long table, wooden, hand-carved, the kind built before machinery made perfect edges. But what startled me wasn't the table. It was the place settings. All 4 chairs were pulled out slightly as if someone had just risen from them. Plates, metal cups, utensils. Everything looked used but untouched, like a moment paused mid-breath. The woman approached the table with a familiarity that made my chest tighten. She traced a fingertip across the wooden surface, leaving no disturbance, no evidence of her touch. "This is one of the years the house protects," she said. "It holds onto it the way some people hold onto a memory." "What year is this?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she adjusted one of the chairs gently, aligning it with the table's edge. A simple gesture, but one that carried something like grief. "This was the last time," she finally said. "The last night this family sat together." I felt the air shift, a subtle drop in temperature, like stepping into a shadow cast by something unseen. The plates on the table trembled slightly, not from vibration but from expectation, as if they anticipated someone returning to finish the meal. My pulse quickened. "Are they still here?" "In a way," she said. "Not the people, the moment." I stepped back instinctively, feeling the walls close in, not physically but temporally, as if the room remembered something painful and was beginning to replay it. She looked at me with a soft sadness. You're standing in a memory that refuses to fade, and the house wants you to see why. The plates trembled again, gently, almost politely, and then stilled, as if the house had corrected itself. But the moment left a faint ringing in the air, a kind of resonance that reminded me of the door handle turning earlier. The woman took a seat at the far end of the table, though she didn't pull the chair forward. She sat only on its edge, like someone accustomed to never fully settling down. This room remembers everything, she said softly, even the conversations that were never finished. A thin beam of light slid through the uneven window, catching the dust in long strokes. The dust didn't drift naturally. It moved in curved lines, following patterns I couldn't decipher, as if the air held the remnants of gestures from people long gone. I instinctively stepped closer to the window, but the woman raised a hand. "Don't stand in the light," she warned. I stopped instantly. "Why not?" "Because the house keeps the light from that night exactly as it was," she said. "And if you stand where someone once was, the year might confuse you for them." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Has that happened before?" Her silence was an answer. The table creaked faintly, and the utensils shifted together, aligning themselves as if guided by invisible hands. Not violently, tenderly, almost lovingly. The gesture was deliberate, familiar, as though the house were setting the table again for guests who hadn't arrived in over a century. The woman looked at the movement with a mix of affection and grief. "The family who lived here had a habit," she said. "They always prepared the table before sunset. It didn't matter what was happening outside. It didn't matter who was late. They believed a home should always welcome its people." I swallowed. "What happened to them?" The question made her eyes lower slightly. "The same thing that happens when rules are broken," she murmured. A moment slipped out of place. A year leaned into another, and the house reacted. As she stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. On that night, the father stepped into a room that wasn't meant for him. He didn't know it had shifted. Her voice thickened. He heard a sound and followed it, just like you almost did. A shiver ran down my spine. Did something happen to him? The woman walked toward the table's head, where a chair sat pushed back more than the others. She rested her hand lightly on the top of it. "He never left the house," she said, "but the year he belonged to did." Something moved across the table, a small vibration like footsteps racing through the wood. I stepped back instinctively. The woman turned to me gently. "That's why the house brought you to this room." Her gaze was steady. "It wants you to understand what it loses when a moment collapses." The vibration across the table faded as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only the weight of silence. But it wasn't empty silence. It felt layered, as if the room held its breath in several different years at once, each waiting for the next movement. The woman stepped away from the head chair and approached the far wall. Her footsteps didn't kick up dust, didn't disturb anything. It was as if she moved through the memory rather than across it. I kept my distance, studying the table again. There was something deeply unsettling about how natural everything looked. Not staged, not ghostly, just paused, as if life had simply drifted a few inches out of reach. The woman touched a faint outline on the wall, a square shape, the mark of a picture frame long removed. "This used to be their family portrait," she said. "It hung here until the moment the house changed." I stepped closer, but she lifted her hand again. "Don't cross the room yet." Her gaze lingered on the outline. "This wall doesn't belong to your year." My breath hitched. "Then which year does it belong to now?" She hesitated before responding. "Still 1910, but not the beginning of it." A faint pressure filled the air, like something gathering strength. The sunlight through the window pulsed once, dimming and brightening in a rhythm impossibly slow, as though syncing with another moment. "Sit," she said quietly. I glanced around. "Where?" "Anywhere you don't see a chair pulled out." That wasn't comforting, but I obeyed. I found a small corner near the archway, a place the house didn't seem to pay attention to, and sat on the floor. The wood was cool beneath me, colder than it had been in the hallway. The temperature wasn't from drafts or gaps. It was a cold born from absence, like a part of the room had never fully warmed back up after something left it. The woman returned to the center of the room. "The father wasn't the only one who sensed something was wrong that night," she said. "The youngest boy felt it too. He kept saying the walls were breathing." I tensed. "Is that just a figure of speech?" "No." Her voice was steady. Some rooms expand when 2 years are too close, and others shrink to push them apart. The air around us shifted, almost imperceptibly, but I felt it. The room tightened at the edges, its corners pulling inward by a fraction of an inch. It wasn't visible to the eye. It was something I felt under my ribs, like a pressure change before a storm. "Look at the table," she instructed. I turned my head. The utensils were moving again, this time slowly, deliberately, sliding back into alignment as if guided by unseen hands repeating old routines. The plate at the head of the table vibrated once, lightly, like someone tapping it with a finger from another century. The woman exhaled softly. "The house is replaying the last moment before the collapse," she said. "It wants you to see how a single mistake can fracture an entire year." She looked at me then, her expression gentle and solemn. "And it wants you to understand something else." A pause. "Once a year breaks, it never truly leaves." The room released us slowly, as if reluctant to let the moment go. The sunlight in the old dining room softened, thinning into a pale glow that hinted the year was retreating again. The table stilled, the dust settled, and the house, for the first time since I stepped inside, seemed to pause long enough for me to breathe without feeling watched by a century I didn't belong to. The woman stepped back toward the doorway, waiting for me to follow. Her posture was different now, less guarded, more resigned, as if leading me through these rooms wasn't something she wanted, but something the house required of her. When I joined her near the archway, the hallway beyond had changed again. Not drastically, just subtly enough that a person familiar with the present might miss it, but I didn't miss it. The corridor no longer matched the blueprint. The wall on the left bowed inward slightly, narrowing the path. The floor seemed darker, as if it had borrowed color from older wood, and the temperature carried a dryness unusual for upstate New York in this season, the kind that suggested air sealed away for decades. "The house is choosing which years you see," the woman said. "It doesn't show them in order, it shows them in need." "In need of what?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She touched the wall lightly, fingertips hovering a hair's breadth above the surface. "Understanding," she said finally. "Or correction. Sometimes both." We walked a few steps before the house shifted again. I didn't see it change. I felt it. A hollow resonance, like stepping into a room that had once been filled with voices now long faded. The floor dipped slightly under my weight, not structurally but temporally. A gentle tug, as if gravity belonged to a different moment here. Ahead, a narrow staircase descended to what should have been a basement, but the blueprint stated clearly that the basement had been filled and sealed in 1947. This staircase was older, narrower, with a railing worn smooth by hands that hadn't touched it in a century. I hesitated at the top step. "This isn't supposed to exist." "It doesn't," she said. "Not in your year." She stepped down first, moving with the certainty of someone who had walked these stairs too many times to fear them. I followed cautiously, keeping one hand near the wall for balance. The air grew cooler as we descended, not musty like an abandoned basement, but crisp, almost clean, like a night air that had never circulated with the present. We reached the bottom. The space opened into a long, narrow room lit by a faint amber glow that had no visible source. The walls here didn't breathe or shift. They held still with an eerie determination, as if they were built from time itself rather than stone. "This is the oldest part of the house," she said quietly. Her voice echoed too slowly, as if each sound lingered a moment longer than it should. I swallowed. "What happened here?" She placed her hand over the rule sheet I still held, pressing it gently. "This," she said, "is where the first rule was broken." I looked around the narrow room, trying to understand what made it feel so different from the rest of the house. Nothing here seemed damaged or decayed. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no scent of age. Instead, the air carried a faint sharpness, like the moment before a thunderstorm, a stillness full of tension, of something waiting to unfold. It felt less like a place, and more like a pause between two moments. The woman moved toward the center, where a faint circular mark covered part of the floor, a discoloration in the wood that looked neither stained nor worn, but imprinted, sunk into time rather than carved into it. I stepped closer, careful not to cross its edge. "This mark," she said, "is older than the house itself." I frowned. "How can that be?" "Because the house wasn't built around land," she said. It was built around a moment. She knelt, her skirt brushing the wooden boards without sound. When the first owner settled here, he chose this exact spot for a reason he never explained. Every journal entry avoided it. Every blueprint ignored it. And every time the floor was repaired or replaced, this mark came back. The air shifted again, not colder but tighter. I felt it wrap around my ribs as though time were adjusting itself to our presence. My fingers curled around the rule sheet and I unfolded more of it for the first time. Rule 3. Never step into the circle. It remembers the moment it lost. My breath caught. What moment did it lose? The woman didn't look at me. A year, she said. An entire year slipped here, collapsed, folded, erased. No one lived through it. No one died in it. It simply emptied. I stared at the mark. It pulsed faintly, not visually, but in sensation, like standing near the edge of a precipice you can't see. Something inside it felt hollow, a hollow so deep it stretched past understanding. The first owner, she continued carefully, didn't understand what was happening. He thought the house was cursed, or that he had done something wrong. But the truth was simpler. He broke a rule he didn't know existed. What did he do? I asked. He stepped into the circle at the wrong hour. She finally looked at me. The house hadn't finished choosing its year. The floor beneath us gave a slow, groaning sigh, not from weight, but from memory awakening. The mark darkened slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the story being told. The woman rose to her feet. Since that night, the house has tried to correct what it lost. It borrows years. It returns others. But it never recovered the one that disappeared here. My pulse quickened. And why are you showing me this now? Because the house thinks you need to understand it. Her voice softened, carrying something like sorrow. And because it knows you're close to breaking the same rule. A faint vibration rippled across the floorboards, and the circle hummed low and steady, as if welcoming a memory back into place. The vibration grew stronger, not in volume, but in presence, as if something beneath the wood were turning slowly in its sleep. I stepped back instinctively, but the woman didn't move. She watched the circle with a familiarity that made my skin prickle, as though she'd stood in this very spot across countless shifting years. You keep saying the house thinks, I whispered, like it has intention. She tilted her head. Not intention, she said softly. Memory. Houses like this don't choose the way people do. They remember, until remembering becomes a kind of will. Her eyes drifted downward. And forgetting becomes a kind of wound. The circle hummed again, this time a fraction louder. Beneath the floorboards, something shifted with a muted thud. Not footsteps, not movement, but the echo of something that once existed and might be trying to find its way back. The sound crawled up my spine. I swallowed hard. Is something inside it? In a way, she murmured. A piece of a year, a fragment of a moment, maybe a breath, maybe a shadow. The house kept what it could salvage. And what about the rest? She looked at me then, her expression unreadable. Gone. A calendar year hollowed out, like a page torn from time. The circle darkened briefly under her words, and the air in the room shifted again, tightening, contracting, as if the walls were bracing against a tide we couldn't see. The light dimmed just slightly, though no source of it was visible. How can a year disappear? I asked. The woman stepped away from the circle, her voice quiet. Because the first owner didn't understand Rule 3. He stepped into the moment before the year arrived. He slipped between times. She paused. The house tried to hold him, but it couldn't hold everything. The phrase unsettled me deeply. Hold him? For a heartbeat, she whispered. Long enough to leave an echo. Long enough for the house to recognize that someone might try the same thing again. She looked at the rule sheet still in my grip. That's why you're here. The room grew impossibly still. Even the faint hum from the circle seemed to withdraw, listening. What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated, and for the first time since meeting her, doubt clouded her features. You walked into the corridor when it shifted, she said. You stood in the light of a year that wasn't yours. You nearly answered a knock meant for someone else. Her gaze softened with something like sadness. The house noticed. My pulse thudded. Noticed what? That you, she said slowly, moved through its years more easily than most. A cold wave ran through me. Why would I be able to do that? She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that brushed the air. Because the house recognizes you. My breath caught. Recognizes me from what? She exhaled, a sound filled with both relief and burden. From the year that vanished, she said. The circle hummed once more, as if answering her. I didn't answer her at first, I couldn't. The words hung in the air like cold mist, refusing to settle into anything that made sense. The year that vanished. It sounded impossible, like something out of an unfinished dream. Yet everything about this house had already pushed me far beyond the boundaries of ordinary explanations. The woman stepped away from the humming circle, giving the room space to breathe again. You felt it, didn't you? She asked gently. The pull. The way certain moments seemed to notice you more than others. I swallowed. I thought that was just fear or confusion. It wasn't. She clasped her hands in front of her, almost as if bracing against a memory. Most people pass through this house unchanged. The years keep their distance, but with you? Her eyes drifted toward the narrow staircase behind us. The years leaned closer. The floor shifted. Not physically, not as a creak or tremor, but in feeling. As if the boards beneath my feet were adjusting to the shape of a decade I wasn't meant to stand in. I held the rule sheet tighter, noticing for the first time that one of the edges felt warmer than the others, like a page long handled by someone with trembling hands. What does this house want from me? I whispered. Understanding, she said softly. Completion, maybe even repair. This place has carried its wound for over a century. It remembers the year it lost, and it remembers anyone touched by it. Her words struck me like cold water. I wasn't alive a century ago. Time inside this house doesn't move like it does outside. She walked toward me, her steps careful, respectful of the room. Fragments find their way forward. Echoes drift. A moment that never finished may still be looking for the person who was supposed to live it. My pulse hammered. Are you saying a part of that year reached me? I'm saying, she murmured, that the house saw you long before you ever stepped through its door. A faint sound echoed from the staircase. Not a footstep, but something quieter. A shift of fabric. A breath caught in a distant throat. The woman glanced toward the noise, but her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked resigned. The year that vanished didn't disappear cleanly, she continued. Pieces of it scattered. Some moments drifted into places they didn't belong. People felt things they couldn't explain. A sudden heaviness. A forgotten memory. A fear with no origin. She paused. You must have felt it too, long before today. A shiver wrapped around my spine and an uninvited memory rose. Not an image, but a sensation. A familiar unease I'd carried for years without knowing why. A feeling of stepping into rooms that seemed older than they were. A sense that certain corners watched. The woman saw recognition forming in my eyes. That's why the house brought you here, she whispered. Not to frighten you, but because it finally found someone who can hear what that lost year has been trying to say. The air shifted again, thinner now, as if the room had begun paying attention to every word spoken. I felt the weight of the house pressing gently on my shoulders. Not threatening, but insistent, like a hand urging me to stay still. The woman stepped closer to the staircase, but she didn't descend. Her eyes focused on the shadows pooling at the bottom, as though she expected them to move or rearrange themselves into a shape she recognized. You asked what the house wants, she said softly. But that's not the right question. What you should ask is why it waited. Waited for what? I asked. For you, she replied. A cold pulse threaded through the floorboards under my feet, a faint rhythm like a heartbeat stored in the wood. It wasn't steady. It wavered, as if the moment connected to it didn't know how to continue. I looked at the rule sheet again, the faded ink trembling faintly under my fingers. Not from the air, but from something within the paper itself, as though the old handwriting still carried the fear or the urgency of the person who wrote it. I unfolded another corner and saw the faint beginning of a new rule, though most of it remained hidden. The woman watched me carefully. Not yet, she murmured. It will reveal itself when the house is ready. The sound at the bottom of the stairs returned, soft, uncertain. A footstep half completed, a breath caught in a loop, something trying to exist without fully succeeding. This time the woman didn't turn toward it. She simply closed her eyes. That, she whispered, is the part of the year that tried to survive. I felt a chill climb my spine. Is it someone? She exhaled slowly, her voice trembling just enough to reveal how deeply the answer mattered. Not anymore. It's what was left when the moment collapsed. A shape without a life, a presence without a name, a piece of time that never learned how to move forward. She opened her eyes. It isn't dangerous, but it's lost. The shadows at the base of the stairs pulsed faintly, like the suggestion of a person shifting weight from one foot to the other. My breath tightened. Why do I feel like it's trying to reach me? I asked. Because you're not a stranger to it, she said. You're part of the moment it lost. Not directly, not by birth, but by trace, by echo. Something in your life, some fear, some silence, some unexplainable pause, aligned you with that year. The house recognized it. I shook my head, not in disbelief, but in overwhelmed confusion. How could I possibly be connected to a year that never existed? She stepped closer, her expression gentle but firm, the way someone delivers news they've rehearsed countless times. Because years don't vanish cleanly. They leave fractures. They leave questions. And sometimes, she placed a hand over her heart. They leave people who feel unfinished without knowing why. The stairs exhaled, a soft, aching creak. The house didn't choose you, she said. It found you. The creak from the stairs lingered just long enough to feel intentional. Not like a warning, not like a threat, more like a quiet question hanging in the air, waiting for someone to hear it. The woman lowered her gaze, as if acknowledging something unseen at the bottom step. I stayed where I was, afraid that even a small movement might disturb the fragile balance of time in the room. Listen, she whispered. I held my breath. The house seemed to inhale with me. For a moment nothing moved. Not the shadows, not the dust, not even the faint hum of the circle upstairs. Then, from somewhere beyond the staircase came a sound so soft it could have been imagined. A quiet shuffle, like the hesitant motion of someone unsure of their own body. It's learning, she murmured, or remembering. A shiver ran down my spine. Remembering what? Something it never had the chance to finish. She stepped back from the stairs, folding her hands together with deliberate care. Moments don't vanish in a clean line. They linger at the edges of years, waiting for someone who can carry them forward. The idea felt impossible and yet strangely familiar, like déjà vu stretched into something deeper, older. I thought back to the strange unease I'd felt for years, the sense of stepping into rooms that felt misaligned, the quiet moments where time seemed to hesitate before moving again. I had always dismissed those sensations as imagination or fatigue, but now the pieces settled into place with a quiet, unnerving clarity. You're saying I've felt this before, I said. She nodded. Because a part of that lost year found you long before you found this house. It brushed against your life in small ways, in pauses, in silences, in moments that didn't belong anywhere. The shadows at the base of the stairs shifted again, not approaching, not retreating, just existing with more intent than before. I felt my heartbeat sync with its subtle rhythm, though I didn't understand how or why. What happens now? I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. The house will continue showing you what it remembers, she said. It wants you to understand the fractures. It wants you to see what remained and what broke. Her voice softened. And it wants to know whether you can carry the unfinished moment without letting it collapse again. I swallowed hard. Carry it? How? That's not for me to decide, she replied. The house will choose the path. I can only guide you through the years it reveals. A faint warmth pressed against my palm and I looked down. The rule sheet was glowing slightly, not with light but with presence. For the first time I saw the next rule clearly. Rule 4. If a moment reaches for you, do not step back. Moments need anchors. The words pulsed gently, as though acknowledging me. The woman met my eyes, her expression solemn but steady. Now, she whispered, you're ready to hear what the lost year has been trying to say. I didn't approach the staircase. I didn't speak to the shadow waiting at its base. The woman didn't urge me forward or backward. She simply stepped aside, allowing the house to breathe between us, giving the moment space to decide what it wanted from me. And in that strange, quiet stillness, something inside me settled. Slowly, carefully, like a memory finally acknowledging its own shape. The house no longer felt threatening. It felt expectant. Every corridor I had crossed, every room that had shifted around me, Every year that had brushed against my skin, they all gathered in the air like threads pulling toward a single point, and yet the point never closed. It hovered, unresolved, offering me neither danger nor relief, only continuity. The woman walked with me back through the narrow hallway, past the places where the years had folded and blurred. The dining room had dimmed again, returning to its quiet arrangement of plates and chairs. The corridor had widened slightly, no longer pressing inward. The walls breathed evenly, their memories soft, controlled, almost grateful. When we reached the parlor, the house felt lighter, as though it had finally finished speaking for now. The woman stopped near the doorway, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "You've seen enough for today," she said, "but the house hasn't finished with you." I held the rule sheet, now warm from my hands, the ink clearer than before, as if awakened. "Will I see you again?" I asked. She gave a faint, tired smile. "When the house calls me," she said, "and when it calls you." I stepped outside into the muted light of late afternoon. The cold air felt familiar again, clean and steady. But as I closed the door behind me, I heard a soft shift from within, like a breath traveling through old wood. Not a warning, not a threat, just a quiet reminder. Some years never truly leave.